I used to believe that marrying into wealth meant joining a family that valued loyalty above all else. I thought that when Kevin proposed with that 3-carat diamond and promised me the world, his family's acceptance would naturally follow. After all, the Harringtons had built their real estate empire on the concept of family legacy. Their company slogan was literally, "Building Futures Together." How ironic that turned out to be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. For 7 years, I, Caroline Bennett Harrington, had been the perfect daughter-in-law. I'd transformed myself from a middle-class marketing executive to a polished socialite who knew which fork to use at charity galas and how to make pleasant conversation with investors. I'd learned to golf, though I hated it. I'd memorized the names of vintage wines I couldn't have afforded in my previous life. I'd even postponed having children because Annette, my mother-in-law, insisted that Kevin needed to focus on his career trajectory first. "Family comes first," Annette would declare at every holiday gathering, raising her crystal glass while her eyes passed over me as if I were merely decorative, a necessary accessory to her son's professional image. Kevin would squeeze my hand. Under the table when this happened, a silent apology I mistook for solidarity. When I married Kevin, I wasn't just marrying the man. I was marrying into the Harrington legacy. The family owned luxury properties across 3 continents, their portfolio reading like a travel magazine's best of list. Their annual family strategy retreats, as they called their vacations, were legendary within their social circle. Each year, the entire family, Kevin's parents Clyde and Annette, his sister Celia and her husband Dean, his brother Jeff and his wife Delilah, would spend 2 weeks at an exclusive destination, combining leisure with business planning. For the first 2 years of our marriage, I wasn't invited. "It's just business, darling," Kevin would explain, kissing my forehead before packing his custom-made luggage. "You'd be bored to tears." I accepted this explanation, though it stung. I was, after all, a marketing executive with an MBA from Northwestern. I understood business strategy, but I remained silent, believing that proving my worth meant patience and understanding. By the 3rd year, I'd earned my invitation, or so I thought. In reality, they needed me. Their newest acquisition, a boutique hotel chain targeting millennials, was floundering. My background in digital marketing made me suddenly valuable. I spent that vacation creating their social media strategy, designing email campaigns, and revamping their entire marketing approach. The hotel chain's occupancy rates increased by 32% within 6 months. After that, I was included in the annual retreats, though always with an unspoken expectation: make yourself useful. And I did. Year after year, I contributed marketing insights, networked with potential partners, and even managed the more difficult clients with a diplomatic touch that Clyde himself acknowledged was surprisingly effective. I was building my place in the family, earning my seat at the table through competence and dedication. I believed I was finally becoming a Harrington in more than just name. Every family has its dynamics, of course. I wasn't blind to Annette's occasional barbed comments or the way Celia would sometimes roll her eyes when I spoke. But these were small prices to pay for belonging to a family that seemed to value excellence and achievement as much as I did. Kevin and I had built a life that looked perfect from the outside. The stunning Lakeshore Drive penthouse, the weekend trips to their Hamptons estate, the charity board positions, the features in Chicago business magazine's Power Couples issue. Beneath this glossy surface, however, there were cracks beginning to show. Kevin worked increasingly long hours, our conversations growing shorter and more perfunctory. When we did spend time together, his attention was often divided between me and his vibrating phone. "The Tokyo deal," he'd explain, or "Dad needs these projections tonight." I accepted these explanations because I understood ambition. I had sacrificed my own career advancement to support his, after all. What I didn't realize, what I refused to see, was that I had become just another acquisition in the Harrington portfolio. A useful asset, maintained as long as I provided value, but never truly part of the collection. I was the painting in the hallway that matched the decor but could be replaced when tastes changed. This year's family retreat was to be held at the Orchid Cove Resort in the Maldives, a newly opened ultra-luxury property that had already hosted royalty and A-list celebrities. The planning had begun months in advance, with Annette sending her usual detailed itineraries and packing suggestions. I had been excited, researching the marine conservation projects in the area and preparing ideas for the Family Foundation's environmental initiative. 2 weeks before departure, I sat at our kitchen island, finalizing a presentation on sustainable luxury marketing that I thought would impress Clyde, when Kevin arrived home later than usual. He loosened his tie, poured himself 2 fingers of scotch, and leaned against the counter with an expression I couldn't quite read. "We need to talk about the Maldives trip," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "I'm almost finished with the sustainability presentation," I replied, turning my laptop toward him. "I think your father will be impressed with the engagement metrics from similar initiatives." Kevin took a long sip of his drink. "That's the thing, Caroline. Mom and Dad think this year's retreat should be focused exclusively on family succession planning. Very private, very sensitive discussions." I waited for him to continue, a strange feeling beginning to form in the pit of my stomach. "They think it might be better if you sit this one out. Just this year." His voice was gentle but firm, as if he were explaining something regrettable but necessary to a child. "Succession planning?" I repeated, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm your wife, Kevin. Doesn't that make me part of the succession discussion?" He sighed, setting down his glass. "It's complicated. There are things about the family holdings, trust structures that, well, Dad's lawyers have advised a certain level of discretion." "Discretion?" I echoed. "From your wife of 7 years. Kevin reached for my hand, his wedding band catching the light. "It's just business, Caroline. You understand business." In that moment, something crystallized within me, a realization that had been forming for years, but that I had refused to acknowledge. I wasn't family. I was an outsider, tolerated when useful, excluded when convenience demanded it. And Kevin, the man who had vowed to make me his partner in all things, saw nothing wrong with this arrangement. Little did they know, I understood business better than they thought. Much better. My dedication to the Harrington family hadn't just been about attending their events or learning their customs. It had been a complete reinvention of myself. When I met Kevin at a charity gala in Chicago, I was Caroline Bennett, a rising star at Horizon Marketing with a reputation for innovative, digital campaigns. My colleagues used to joke that I could sell sunscreen in a snowstorm. I had my own apartment in Wicker Park, a close circle of college friends, and a 5-year plan that involved eventually starting my own boutique agency. Then came Kevin, with his confident smile and family legacy. Our courtship was a whirlwind of private jet weekends and champagne brunches. When he proposed after just 8 months, my friends expressed concern about the speed, but I was certain. This wasn't just about love, it was about potential, about building something extraordinary together. The sacrifices began small but multiplied quickly. First, it was moving from my beloved Wicker Park apartment to Kevin's Gold Coast penthouse. The commute to Horizon would be brutal from there, I had pointed out. "Why don't you take some time off?" Kevin had suggested. "You've been working so hard. Besides, Mom's charity foundation could use your marketing expertise." That time off stretched into resignation when Annette made it clear that no Harrington spouse maintained a separate career. "Divided loyalty leads to divided success," she'd explained over lunch at her country club, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light as she patted my hand. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The family business requires full commitment. So I channeled my ambition into being the perfect Harrington spouse. I redecorated our penthouse to better showcase Kevin's art collection. I organized dinner parties for his business associates, ensuring each event was both impressive and strategically valuable. I accompanied him to industry events, memorizing details about potential investors so I could guide conversations toward successful deals. When Kevin's father needed help rebranding one of their struggling hotel properties, I spent 3 months developing a comprehensive marketing plan. I worked 14-hour days, conducting market research, redesigning their visual identity, and creating a digital strategy that would appeal to younger travelers. I presented my findings in a detailed report, complete with implementation timelines and ROI projections. Clyde had nodded approvingly. "Not bad for someone without real estate experience," he'd said, before handing the report to his marketing team without crediting my work. The hotel's subsequent success was attributed to the Harrington touch in the family's year-end newsletter. I swallowed my frustration because that's what family does, isn't it? They contribute without expecting constant recognition. Besides, Kevin had been proud, telling me privately that his father was impressed even if he wouldn't say it directly. The personal sacrifices were even more significant. At 32, I had wanted to start trying for a baby, but Annette had pulled me aside during one family dinner. "Darling, children change everything," she'd said, her voice lowered conspirationally. "Kevin is just about to take over the European expansion. A pregnancy now would be the inconvenient." Kevin had agreed when I'd brought it up later that night. "Mom's right, Caroline. Let's give it another year or two. The timing isn't right." That had been 3 years ago. Each time I raised the subject, there was always another deal, another expansion, another reason to wait. Meanwhile, Celia had given birth to her second child, with Annette flying to New York to stay with her for a month after the delivery. When I'd mentioned this discrepancy, Kevin had shrugged. "Celia's husband isn't directly involved in operations. It's different for us." I had stopped bringing it up. Instead, I channeled my energy into proving my worth to the family in other ways. When Jeff's wife Delilah struggled to fit in with the Harrington social circle, I became her guide and defender, helping her navigate the complex expectations and unspoken rules. When Clyde's 60th birthday approached, I spent months secretly compiling a leather-bound book of congratulatory messages from business associates and politicians he admired. When the family foundation needed to raise its profile, I organized a gala that attracted coverage in national publications and raised twice the expected amount. My own family fell by the wayside as I immersed myself in Harrington priorities. I missed my sister's graduation because it conflicted with an investor weekend at the Hamptons house. I cut short visits to my parents because Annette would call with emergencies that somehow always coincided with my rare time away. My college, friends' invitations became less frequent as I repeatedly canceled plans for Harrington obligations. My father had noticed the change during his last visit to Chicago. "You seem tired, Caro," he'd said, using my childhood nickname. "And you've lost weight. Are you happy here?" "I'm just busy, Dad," I'd replied, showing him the view from our penthouse as if the Chicago skyline were evidence of my contentment. "The family business requires a lot of attention." He'd given me a long look before saying, "Just remember, being busy isn't the same as being fulfilled." I had changed the subject, uncomfortable with his perception. The truth was, I had been proud of my ability to adapt, to transform myself into someone the Harringtons could accept. Each sacrifice felt like an investment in our shared future. Each compromise seemed like a stepping stone toward true belonging. I had believed that eventually there would be a return on these investments: recognition, inclusion, genuine acceptance as a Harrington. 7 years of carefully calculated choices. 7 years of putting their needs before my own. 7 years of proving myself again and again. And now, with a single conversation about the Maldives trip, Kevin had made it clear, no amount of sacrifice would ever be enough. I would always be the outsider, useful but ultimately expendable. As I sat at our kitchen island, watching Kevin fidget with his empty Scotch glass, I realized that the person I had become, this polished, accommodating version of Caroline, was unrecognizable to the ambitious woman I had once been. I had given the Harringtons everything, even pieces of myself I hadn't known were negotiable. And what had I received in return? A beautiful penthouse that never quite felt like home. A husband who viewed our marriage as secondary to family strategy. And now, the final indignity. Exclusion from a family retreat because I wasn't family enough to be trusted with sensitive discussions. It's not like you'd enjoy it anyway, Kevin continued, reaching for the Scotch bottle to pour himself another drink. You know how intense these planning sessions get. Dad and Jeff arguing over portfolio diversification, Mom micromanaging every meal. He offered a smile that was probably meant to be reassuring. I kept my expression neutral, though my mind was racing. When exactly was this decision made? Kevin busied himself with adding a single ice cube to his glass. We discussed it during the board meeting last Thursday. Last Thursday? The day I'd brought lunch to his office because he'd mentioned having back-to-back meetings. I'd sat in the reception area for 45 minutes before his assistant told me he was unavailable. He'd texted later, "Sorry, babe, meetings ran long. See you at home. So everyone knows except me? Celia, Dean, Jeff, Delilah? They all know I'm not invited." Kevin winced slightly. "It's not a big deal, Caroline. You're making it sound like some sort of conspiracy." "What am I supposed to do while you're all in the Maldives for 2 weeks?" I asked, closing my laptop with more force than necessary. "Actually, that's the other thing," Kevin said, his tone brightening as if he were about to offer good news. "Mom suggested you could use the time to oversee the renovation at the Lake Forest property. The contractors have fallen behind schedule, and someone needs to be on site to make decisions." The Lake Forest property. The massive, century-old mansion the Harringtons had purchased last year as an investment, which needed extensive updates, before it could be flipped. The property that sat empty and partially gutted, an hour's drive from Chicago, in an area where I knew no one. "You want me to house-sit a construction site while you're at a luxury resort?" Kevin frowned. "It's not house-sitting, Caroline. It's project management. You're good at that sort of thing. You've got an eye for detail. So, I'm good enough to supervise contractors but not good enough to be included in family succession. Planning? That's not fair," Kevin said, his voice hardening slightly. "This is business." "It's family business," I countered. "And apparently I'm not family." Kevin set his glass down with a sharp click against the marble countertop. "You're being dramatic. It's one trip." "It's not about the trip, Kevin." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture I once found endearing, but now recognized as a signal of his impatience. "What is it about, then? Please enlighten me." I wanted to tell him everything. How I felt perpetually on probation with his family. How I'd sacrificed my own ambitions to support his. How I'd postponed motherhood because his mother thought it inconvenient. But looking at him standing there, defensive and irritated rather than understanding, I knew he wouldn't hear me. "Not really." "Never mind," I said quietly. "When do you leave?" Relief washed over his features. He thought the storm had passed. "Next Friday. The jet leaves at 10 a.m. I nodded, already formulating questions he wouldn't expect. "Who's handling the Westbrook account while you're gone?" "Marley," he replied, referring to his new assistant. "She'll coordinate with the Singapore office." "And the Parker development deal?" "That should close before we leave, but if it doesn't, the lawyers will handle it." He seemed pleased by my apparent interest in business details rather than the personal slight. "What about the London property? Wasn't there some issue with the zoning permits?" Kevin waved a dismissive hand. Dad's taking care of it. Everything's under control, Caroline. The world won't stop turning just because we take 2 weeks away. No, the world wouldn't stop turning. But something had shifted in mine, a tectonic movement beneath the surface that Kevin couldn't feel. I think I'll go lie down, I said, sliding off the bar stool. I've got a headache. Kevin nodded absently, already reaching for his phone, which had begun to vibrate. It's Dad, he said, not bothering to look up as I left the room. I walked slowly to our bedroom, closing the door behind me. Instead of lying down, I went to the walk-in closet, a room larger than my entire first apartment, and sank down onto the plush ottoman in the center. Surrounding me were rows of designer clothes, shoes, and handbags, most purchased to meet the expectations of Harrington events and appearances. From the adjoining bathroom came the faint smell of Kevin's expensive cologne. On his side of the closet hung precisely organized suits, color-coded ties, and monogrammed shirts. 7 years of shared space, yet in that moment, everything felt alien. I reached for my phone and pulled up my calendar. Not the shared one that Kevin's assistant had access to, but my personal one. The next 2 weeks were filled with Harrington-related commitments. A charity committee meeting Annette had insisted I join, a dinner with potential investors for Kevin's latest project, a planning session for the Family Foundation's annual gala. None of these people would miss me if I didn't attend. None of them truly saw me as essential. My gaze drifted to the built-in safe where we kept important documents. Kevin had never bothered to change the combination from his birth year, a carelessness that had always struck me as arrogant. With steady hands, I opened it and removed our passport folder, confirming that both our passports were current. Next to them sat a bank statement from my personal account, an account Kevin didn't know about, where I'd deposited the consulting fees I occasionally earned from former clients who reached out despite my retirement. It wasn't a fortune, but it was mine. Untouched by Harrington influence or control, I returned everything to the safe except for my passport, which I slipped into my bedside drawer. Then I picked up my laptop again and opened a private browsing window. The Orchid Cove Resort's website appeared on the screen, showcasing infinity pools that seemed to merge with the turquoise Indian Ocean, overwater bungalows with glass floors, and private beaches accessible only to the resort's guests. The Harringtons weren't the only ones with connections in the hospitality industry. During my time at Horizon Marketing, I had worked extensively with luxury hotel groups. One of my former clients, Anna Lewis Weber, had gone on to become the VP of Acquisitions for Eclipse Luxury Properties, a competitor to the Harrington Hotel Group. Anna Lewis and I had stayed in touch over the years, meeting occasionally for lunch when she visited Chicago. She had reached out multiple times about potential positions with her company, positions I had politely declined out of loyalty to the Harrington family business. I scrolled through my contacts until I found her number, then hesitated for just a moment before typing a message. Are you still looking for insights on emerging luxury markets? I may have some time available for consulting in the near future. Her response came less than 5 minutes later. Caroline, yes, absolutely. Would love to catch up. Dinner next week? I confirmed a date, then set my phone aside, a plan beginning to form. Not a plan born of anger or immediate revenge, but something deeper, a reclaiming of the self I had gradually surrendered. From the living room, I could hear Kevin's voice, animated as he discussed business with his father. He hadn't come to check on me, hadn't noticed that my headache might be something more significant. For the first time in years, I felt truly clear-headed. That night, I barely slept. As Kevin snored softly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying not just our conversation about the Maldives, but countless other moments from our marriage. I thought about the Christmas 3 years ago when Annette had accidentally excluded me from the family photo, then expressed exaggerated dismay when I pointed it out. Oh dear, did we miss you? Well, we can't possibly redo it now. Everyone's already dispersing. I remembered the dinner party where Clyde had introduced me to a major investor as Kevin's wife, despite my having met the same investor at a previous event and discussed his portfolio in detail. When I'd reminded Clyde of this, he'd chuckled and said, "Well, you all look the same after a while," before turning the conversation back to business. I recalled how Celia had once drunkenly confessed at a New Year's Eve party that Annette had asked all of them not to share certain family stories around me because outsiders don't need to know everything. When I'd mentioned this to Kevin the next day, he'd dismissed it as Celia being dramatic and suggested I'd misunderstood. Each memory clicked into place like puzzle pieces forming a picture I'd refused to see. The Harringtons had never intended to accept me as one of their own. I had been auditioning for a role that was never actually available. And Kevin had allowed it all. More than allowed, he had participated, prioritizing his family's comfort over his wife's inclusion at every turn. He had watched me twist myself into someone unrecognizable trying to gain acceptance, and he had said nothing. By morning, I felt strangely calm. The disappointment and hurt remained, but beneath them was something unexpected: relief. The exhausting performance could end. The constant seeking of approval could stop. The truth, however painful, was clarifying. Kevin left early for a breakfast meeting, kissing my forehead perfunctorily and reminding me about the Lake Forest property, as if our conversation the night before had resolved everything. "I'll have Teddy email you the contractor's contact information," he said, referring to his personal assistant. "Just keep them on schedule and under budget. You're good at that sort of thing." As good as invisible, I thought, but I simply nodded and wished him a good day. Once he was gone, I showered and dressed with unusual care, selecting a tailored navy suit I hadn't worn since my Horizon marketing days. Then I made 3 phone calls. The first was to Anna Lewis, moving our dinner up to that evening. "Something's come up," I explained. "I may have more availability than I initially thought." The second was to my old friend Marissa, who had left Horizon to start her own financial advisory firm. We had drifted apart as my Harrington obligations consumed my time, but she answered on the second ring, her voice warm with surprise. "Caroline Bennett, to what do I owe this pleasure?" "I need some financial advice," I said. "Completely confidential." There was a slight pause before she answered, her tone shifting to professional concern. "Of course. When would you like to come in?" "Today, if possible." The third call was to a real estate attorney I had met through one of Annette's charity functions. Ironically, a woman Annette had dismissed as too aggressive after she'd pushed back on some of Clyde's assertions during a foundation board meeting. "Delilah recommended you highly," I lied, knowing the attorney wouldn't verify this with Kevin's sister-in-law. "I need to discuss some property matters, privately." By noon, I had meetings scheduled for the entire day, appointments that wouldn't appear on any calendar Kevin or his family could access. Before leaving the penthouse, I paused in front of the large framed photo from our wedding that hung in the entryway. Kevin and I stood surrounded by the Harrington family, everyone dressed impeccably, smiling for the camera. I studied my own face in the photo, hopeful, a little uncertain, eager to please. "I'm sorry," I whispered to that younger version of myself. "But I'm going to fix this." My meeting with Marissa was eye-opening. When I explained that I wanted a complete analysis of my personal financial situation, separate from the Harrington assets, she didn't ask why. She simply pulled up spreadsheets and asked pointed questions about my consulting income, personal, savings, and independent investments. "The trust fund from your grandmother," she said, scrolling through documents I had forgotten I'd shared with her years ago. "It matured when you turned 30, correct?" I nodded. It wasn't an enormous sum by Harrington standards, about $250,000, but I had never touched it, viewing it as emergency money. And it's still in the original investment portfolio? You haven't moved it? No, I admitted. Kevin suggested we leave it alone since the return was decent enough. Marissa gave me a look I couldn't quite interpret. Let's run some numbers, she said, turning to her computer. I think you might have more options than you realize. 2 hours later, I left her office with a clear understanding of my financial position and a strategy that made my heart race with equal parts fear and exhilaration. The meeting with the attorney, Diana Morris, was equally productive. She listened carefully as I outlined my concerns about separate property and asked incisive questions about prenuptial agreements and commingled assets. The Harringtons would have insisted on a prenup, she said, making notes on a legal pad. They did, I confirmed. It primarily protects the family business interests and inherited properties, but not necessarily new acquisitions, she said, tapping her pen thoughtfully. Especially if purchased through separate corporate entities with separate funds. By the time I met Anna Lewis for dinner at a small restaurant far from the usual Harrington haunts, I had the outline of a plan that would have been unthinkable just 24 hours earlier. Anna Lewis looked exactly as I remembered, sharp, stylish, with an intensity that had always made her excellent at her job. She hugged me warmly before we sat down. I've missed you, Caroline, she said. The corporate hospitality world isn't the same without your marketing genius. I smiled, genuinely touched. I've missed it too, more than I realized. After we ordered, she leaned forward. So, tell me what's prompted this sudden interest in consulting again. I was beginning to think the Harringtons had you under lock and key. The comment was playful, but it hit closer to home than she could know. I took a sip of water, choosing my next words carefully. What can you tell me about the Orchid Cove Resort in the Maldives? Her eyebrows rose slightly. Interesting that you ask. It's one of the properties we've had our eye on. Relatively new, stunning location, exceptional design, currently owned by MHG Luxury Group. Are they interested in selling? I asked. Anna Lewis tilted her head, studying me with newfound curiosity. There have been rumors. Nothing official, but word in the industry is that they overextended on the initial investment and haven't seen the occupancy rates they projected. She paused. Why do you ask? I met her gaze directly. What if I told you I want to make them an offer they can't refuse? Anna Lewis sat back in her chair, her expression shifting from curiosity to careful assessment. Caroline, buying a luxury resort isn't like picking up a vacation home. We're talking about an investment in the tens of millions. I'm aware, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Are the Harringtons looking to expand their portfolio in the Maldives? Because if so, this is a conversation you should be having with— This isn't about the Harringtons, I interrupted, surprised by the firmness in my tone. This would be my investment, mine alone. She studied me for a long moment before reaching for her wine glass. Okay, let's say we're having a hypothetical conversation about you personally acquiring a luxury resort. What's your angle here, Caroline? Because the woman I knew at Horizon was brilliant but cautious. This is not cautious. The waiter arrived with our appetizers, giving me a moment to consider my response. When he departed, I leaned forward slightly. What if I told you I've been reconsidering my role in the Harrington Empire? That I'm exploring opportunities that would be exclusively mine? Anna Lewis nodded slowly. I'd say it's about time. She took a bite of her tuna tartare, then added, But I'd still question why you'd start with a property of this magnitude. I hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. Anna Lewis had always been straightforward with me, even when we were competitors. If I wanted her help, I needed to offer at least some truth. The Harrington family is planning their annual retreat at Orchid Cove, 2 weeks from now. Understanding flickered in her eyes. And you want to— What? Surprise them by being the owner when they arrive? Put so bluntly, it sounded absurd, childish even. But there was more to it than mere shock value. I want to make a statement, I said carefully. But I also want to make a smart investment. If the property is underperforming but has potential, it could be an opportunity. Anna Lewis set down her fork. Let me be clear. You want to secretly buy the resort where your in-laws are planning their vacation. Reveal yourself as the new owner. When they arrive and somehow have this be financially sound. When she put it that way, doubt crept in. Was I being impulsive, driven by hurt rather than logic? Was I proposing to risk my financial security for a moment of satisfaction? I know how it sounds, I admitted. Actually, she said, reaching for her handbag and pulling out a tablet. It sounds like something I'd do. A smile spread across her face as she tapped the screen. And you're in luck, because I happen to have some insider information on Orchid Cove. She turned the tablet toward me, displaying financial projections and occupancy reports. The resort is bleeding money, but not because of the concept or location. Management has been abysmal, and their marketing strategy is stuck in the last decade. They've alienated travel advisors by overbooking and failing to deliver on promises. Scan the numbers, my marketing mind already identifying problems and solutions. They're targeting the wrong demographic. And their pricing structure makes no sense. They're undercutting themselves on room rates, but overcharging for experiences. Anna Lewis nodded approvingly. Exactly. MHG wants to unload it before word gets out about their mismanagement. They're looking for a quiet sale to save face. How quiet? I asked. Very. No public listing. Invitation-only offers. She reclaimed her tablet. Caroline, with the right management and positioning, this property could be remarkable. But it would require significant capital and expertise. I have capital, I said, thinking of my grandmother's trust and the consulting fees I'd saved. Not enough to buy it outright, but enough for a substantial down payment. As for expertise, I gestured between us. That's where partnerships come in. Anna Lewis leaned back, studying me with newfound respect. You're serious about this? Completely. She tapped her fingers on the table, thinking. Eclipse might be interested in a co-investment scenario. We provide most of the capital, you put in what you can and take a management role. We both benefit from the turnaround. Would I have controlling interest? I asked. Decision-making authority? For that, you'd need at least 51% ownership. She shook her head slightly. That would require more capital than I think you have available. I thought of the prenuptial agreement, the separate finances, the careful divisions the Harringtons had always maintained between their assets and mine. They had created these boundaries to protect themselves, never imagining I might someday use the same structures for my own purposes. What if I could secure additional investment? I asked. Private capital, not from the Harringtons. Anna Lewis raised an eyebrow. If you had legitimate investors and a solid business plan, it could work. But Caroline, this would have to happen quickly and discreetly. If the Harringtons get wind of this, they won't, I said with a confidence I was beginning to genuinely feel. Kevin and his family are completely focused on their succession planning. They won't be paying attention to a resort acquisition halfway around the world. And when they eventually find out, what then? It was the question I had been asking myself all day. What did I actually want from this? Revenge? Recognition? Or something else entirely? Then I'll have made my point, I said. And more importantly, I'll have established myself independently of them. She considered this, then pulled out her phone. Let me make a call. If we're going to do this, we need to move quickly. As Anna Lewis stepped away to make her call, I sat alone at the table, facing the clearest crossroads of my life. To my left lay the path I had been following for 7 years, continuing to accommodate the Harringtons, accepting my place on the periphery of their world, maintaining the appearance of a perfect marriage while my sense of self slowly eroded. To my right was a path of risk and uncertainty, but also of potential liberation. No more seeking approval that would never truly come. No more compromising my worth for conditional acceptance. When Anna Lewis returned, her expression was serious but excited. My contact at MHG is interested. They're sending over preliminary financials tonight. We can review them together. How quickly could this happen? I asked. If, and this is a big if, everything checks out and we can secure financing, we could, potentially close within 10 days. She sat down, leaning forward intently. Caroline, this is moving from hypothetical to very real. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want? In that moment, I thought of Kevin dismissing my concerns about the family trip. I thought of Annette's years of subtle exclusion. I thought of all the times I had dimmed my own light to avoid overshadowing the Harrington family narrative. Yes, I said, feeling the weight of the decision and embracing it fully. I'm certain. Anna Lewis nodded once, decisively. Then let's get to work. As we bent our heads together over financial projections and property assessments, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The thrill of charting my own course, of making decisions based on my own judgment rather than someone else's expectations. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Kevin had texted twice during dinner. I hadn't replied. For the first time since our marriage, the Harrington timeline was not my priority. I had chosen my path, and there would be no turning back. Next morning, I woke before Kevin, something I rarely did. Usually he was up at 5:30, hitting the home gym before showering and heading to the office. Today, I slipped out of bed at 5 guy, dressed quietly in running clothes, and left the penthouse before he stirred. Instead of running, I took a car to a coffee shop several neighborhoods away, where I'd arranged to meet Anna Lewis and her financial team. By the time Kevin would be ordering his protein shake from our housekeeper, I was reviewing acquisition documents and signing non-disclosure agreements. The numbers are even more favorable than we initially thought, Anna Lewis said, sliding a folder across the table. MHG is motivated to sell quickly and quietly. They've lowered their asking price by 8% overnight. I reviewed the revised offer. Even with the reduction, the amount was staggering, far beyond what I could manage alone. How are we structuring the financing? James Chen, Eclipse's CFO, outlined a complex arrangement involving my assets as a down payment, Eclipse providing the majority of capital, and a small group of private investors covering the remainder. The resulting ownership would give me 51% controlling interest, with Eclipse holding 40% and the private investors splitting the remaining 9%. You'll be the majority owner on paper, James explained, with operational decision-making authority. Eclipse will provide back-end support and industry expertise. And the Harringtons won't see this coming, Anna Lewis added with a slight smile. We've created a holding company, Horizon Futures LLC, that will be the official purchaser. Your name won't appear in any public documents. I raised an eyebrow at the company name, a nod to my former employer, and perhaps a statement about my own horizon expanding beyond the Harrington limitations. How soon can we close? I asked. If the inspections check out and the financing comes through as planned, we could take ownership 3 days before the Harrington family is scheduled to arrive, James said, checking his calendar. It will be tight, but doable. I nodded, signing the preliminary agreement with a steady hand. Let's make it happen. When I returned to the penthouse, Kevin was in the kitchen, frowning at his phone. He looked up when I entered, surprise evident on his face. Where were you? I was worried. Running, I said simply, gesturing at my attire. Thought I'd try a new route this morning. His frown deepened slightly. You didn't answer my texts last night. Sorry about that. Dinner with an old colleague ran late, and I was exhausted when I got home. I poured myself a cup of coffee, keeping my movements casual. How was your day? Kevin launched into a detailed account of his meetings, seemingly satisfied by my explanation. As he talked, I made appropriate noises of interest while my mind calculated timelines and contingencies for the resort acquisition. Mom called this morning, he said, interrupting my thoughts. She wants to know if you can join her for lunch today to discuss the Lake Forest property. I took a slow sip of coffee, considering my response. The old Caroline would have immediately rearranged her schedule to accommodate Annette. The new Caroline had priorities of her own. I can't today, I said, my tone pleasant but firm. I have appointments. Kevin looked startled. What appointments? Personal ones, I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. I can meet with her tomorrow. Afternoon if that works. He stared at me for a moment, clearly unused to me declining Harrington family requests. I'll let her know, he said finally. But she won't be happy. I shrugged slightly. It's just a day's delay. The renovations won't fall apart in 24 hours. Kevin's phone buzzed with an incoming call, saving him from having to respond. He glanced at the screen. It's Dad. I need to take this. He stepped out onto the balcony, already switching into business mode. Over the next 5 days, I executed my plan with meticulous care. While Kevin believed I was consulting on a short-term marketing project, a convenient explanation for my sudden busy schedule, I was actually orchestrating the acquisition of Orchid Cove Resort. I met with Annette about the Lake Forest property, listening attentively as she detailed her expectations for the renovation. The contractors need a firm hand, she instructed, sliding a folder of paint samples across the table. I've selected the appropriate colors for each room. No deviations, Caroline. The resale value depends on proper execution. Of course, I agreed, accepting the folder with a smile. I'll make sure everything is done exactly to your specifications. She seemed pleased with my acquiescence, patting my hand in that condescending way she had perfected. I knew we could count on you, dear. While we're having our little family retreat, you'll be making yourself useful. That's what matters, isn't it? Absolutely, I said, maintaining my pleasant expression while thinking of the conference call I had scheduled in 2 hours with the Orchid Cove management team. When Kevin asked about my meetings, I gave vague but plausible answers about marketing consultations and spa appointments. I'm trying to keep busy, I explained. Since I won't be joining you in the Maldives, I thought I'd focus on some personal projects. He seemed relieved by my apparent acceptance of the situation. That's my girl, he said approvingly. Always making the best of things. I didn't correct his assumption. Let him believe I was being the compliant wife he expected. The reality would become clear soon enough. 3 days before the Harringtons were scheduled to depart, I received the call I had been waiting for. Anna Lewis's voice was triumphant. It's done. The final paperwork was signed an hour ago. Congratulations, Caroline. You're officially the majority owner of Orchid Cove Resort. A wave of exhilaration washed over me. Has the management team been notified? Yes, and they're awaiting your instructions. The current general manager has agreed to stay on through the transition. Excellent. And the Harrington reservation? Still confirmed for the Grand Overwater residence, as requested. The family has no idea about the change in ownership. I smiled, feeling a sense of power I hadn't experienced in years. Perfect. I have some specific instructions for their stay. That evening, as Kevin packed for the trip, I sat on our bed watching him methodically organize his luggage. Are you sure you'll be all right while we're gone? He asked, folding an expensive golf shirt with practiced precision. 2 weeks is a long time. I'll manage, I said mildly. I'm actually looking forward to some time to myself. He glanced at me, perhaps catching something different in my tone. Is everything okay, Caroline? You've seemed distracted lately. I met his gaze with a calm smile. Everything is exactly as it should be. Kevin studied me for a moment longer before returning to his packing, dismissing whatever concern had briefly surfaced. I've arranged for the contractors to check in with you daily about Lake Forest, and Teddy will email you updates about the business matters, just to keep you in the loop. That's thoughtful, I said, mentally calculating the time difference between Chicago and the Maldives. By the time they arrived at Orchid Cove, the wheels of my plan would already be in motion. As I watched my husband methodically prepare for a family vacation I had been excluded from, I felt strangely detached from the hurt that had initially driven my actions. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my own agency, about proving to myself, not to them, that I was capable of more than they had ever allowed me to be. Kevin closed his suitcase and turned to me. "I'll miss you," he said, sounding almost surprised by the admission. I smiled, but didn't say what he expected to hear. Instead, I replied, "The Maldives will be an experience you won't forget." And for once, I was certain I was right. The morning the Harringtons departed for the Maldives, I drove Kevin to the private airfield where the family jet waited. The entire clan was there, luggage being loaded by efficient staff while Clyde checked his watch impatiently. "Right on time," I said as we pulled up beside the other luxury vehicles. Kevin squeezed my hand before opening his door. "I'll call when we land." I nodded, remaining in the driver's seat as he retrieved his bags from the trunk. Through the windshield, I watched Annette's face light up at the sight of her son, then dim slightly when she spotted me in the car. She said something to Celia, who glanced my way with poorly concealed curiosity. Kevin returned to my window. "Sure you don't want to come say goodbye to everyone?" I smiled, knowing this would be the last time I played the role they'd assigned me. "I think it's best if I don't delay your departure. Have a wonderful trip." He leaned in for a quick kiss, then joined his family without looking back. I waited until they had all boarded before driving away, the image of the gleaming jet growing smaller in my rearview mirror. Instead of returning to the penthouse, I directed my car toward Lake Michigan, finding a quiet spot along the shoreline. The early summer breeze rippled across the water as I stepped out, leaning against the hood to absorb the moment of transition. For so long, I had measured my movements against Harrington expectations. Even my rebellion had been shaped by their actions. Now, as they soared toward the Indian Ocean, I felt the weight of their influence beginning to lift. The next steps would be truly mine. I pulled out my phone and called Anna Lewis. "They're on their way. Everything's prepared at Orchid Cove," she confirmed. "The staff has their instructions. Your suite is ready whenever you want to depart." "Book me on tonight's flight," I said, watching a sailboat tack against the wind. "It's time." After hanging up, I remained by the lake, allowing the magnitude of what I'd done to fully register. I had committed millions of dollars to an audacious plan. I had deceived my husband and his family. I had possibly jeopardized my marriage. Yet beneath the enormity of these actions was a surprising calm. For the first time in years, I was moving towards something of my own creation rather than accommodating someone else's vision. My phone buzzed, with a text from Kevin. "Boarding now. Love you." I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I scrolled through my photo gallery, finding a picture from early in our relationship. Kevin and me on a weekend trip to Michigan, his arm around my shoulders, both of us laughing at something now forgotten. We had looked happy, possibilities stretching before us like an open road. When had that road narrowed? When had his family's needs eclipsed our partnership? Or had it always been that way, and I had simply been too enamored to notice? I thought of the moment in our kitchen when he had told me I wasn't invited on the family vacation. The casualness of the exclusion had been more revealing than any dramatic confrontation could have been. In that moment, priorities had been clearly established, boundaries drawn. I had stepped over those boundaries now, irrevocably. Whatever happened at Orchid Cove, there would be no returning to the compliant role I had played for 7 years. Finally, I typed a response. "Safe travels. We'll talk when you arrive." Back at the penthouse, I packed methodically, selecting clothes appropriate for the tropical climate and my new role as resort owner. Into a separate bag went financial documents, the preliminary management plan I had developed with Anna Lewis, and dossiers on each member of the resort staff. As I moved through the spacious apartment, I was struck by how little of myself was reflected in its pristine design. The art had been selected by an interior designer Annette had recommended. The furniture arrangements optimized the space for entertaining Harrington business associates. Even the bedroom linens were in the precise shade of blue Kevin preferred. In the home office, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and removed a leather portfolio I hadn't looked at in years. Inside were sketches and notes from my marketing days, campaign concepts, brand strategies, creative briefs. Work that had once energized and fulfilled me. One page in particular caught my eye, a hotel positioning concept I had developed but never pitched. Authentic luxury, the headline read, experiences that transform rather than merely impress. I smiled at the irony. Here I was, about to take control of a luxury resort using principles I had formulated years before the Harringtons had redirected my professional energy toward their interests. On impulse, I slipped the portfolio into my carry-on. These ideas might prove useful in reimagining Orchid Cove. My phone rang as I was doing a final check of my luggage. Annette's name flashed on the screen. "Hello?" I answered, keeping my tone neutral. "Caroline, dear, we've just stopped to refuel." Her voice had that artificially warm quality she used when asking for favors. I realized I forgot to mention the master bathroom at Lake Forest. The marble we ordered for the shower surround is completely wrong. "Is it?" I murmured, already knowing where this was heading. "Absolutely unsuitable. It needs to be replaced immediately. I've taken the liberty of selecting an alternative from Carrara Designs. They'll be expecting your call tomorrow morning." Could picture her sitting in the luxurious jet, perhaps with a mimosa in hand, issuing instructions as if I were merely an extension of her will. "I'll make a note of it," I said, my composure unwavering. "Excellent. And one more thing. The landscape. Architect needs to be monitored closely. Last time he tried to substitute inferior plantings and thought I wouldn't notice." "Heaven forbid," I said, unable to resist a touch of sarcasm. If Annette detected it, she gave no indication. "Exactly. Well, I should go. Clyde needs my input on the seating arrangement for dinner. The hotel management seems quite accommodating, but one can never be too careful with these details." "Indeed," I agreed, imagining the surprise that awaited them. Enjoy your stay at Orchid Cove. Hours later, as my commercial flight soared over the Atlantic, I gazed out at the stars scattered across the night sky. The Harringtons would arrive at the resort approximately 18 hours before me, giving them just enough time to settle in before my appearance. Anna Lewis had offered to arrange a private jet, but I had declined. This journey was about stepping away from Harrington excess, about finding my own measure of success. Besides, I had specific instructions for how the family was to be greeted upon arrival, attentions that would seem like exceptional service, but would actually be setting the stage for my revelation. A flight attendant stopped beside my seat. "Can I get you anything, Ms. Bennett?" I noticed she had used my maiden name, the name I had provided when booking the ticket. "Just water, thank you." As she moved away, I realized how natural it had felt to hear my original name, Caroline Bennett. The person I had been before becoming a Harrington appendage. The person I was reclaiming. Sleep eluded me as the plane crossed time zones. Instead, I reviewed my plans for Orchid Cove, refining management strategies and marketing concepts. By the time dawn broke outside my window, illuminating wisps of cloud with golden light, I had filled a notebook with ideas. I was no longer just reacting to the Harringtons' exclusion. I was creating something new, a vision that drew on my skills and instincts rather than conforming to someone else's expectations. For the first time in years, I felt fully awake. The Maldives appeared below the plane as a scatter of jewel-like, atolls set in the vast turquoise expanse of the Indian Ocean. As we descended, I could make out the distinctive shape of Orchid Cove, a lush tropical island ringed by white sand, its overwater bungalows extending from the shore like the petals of a flower. My phone had been filling with messages during the flight. Most were from Kevin, their tone evolving from casual updates to mounting concern. Arrived at Orchid Cove. Even more beautiful than the pictures. The staff here is incredible. They knew all our preferences before we even mentioned them. Strange thing, they upgraded us to an even larger residence. Dad's thrilled. Caroline, where are you? I've been trying to reach you for hours. Getting worried. Just called the Lake Forest. Contractors. They said you canceled tomorrow's meeting. What's going on? Caroline, please call me. Mom's asking questions I can't answer. I hadn't replied to any of them, allowing uncertainty to build. It was a small taste of the feeling I had experienced at the airport when I realized I'd been excluded from their plans. A car was waiting for me when I landed, the driver holding a sign with Ms. Bennett written in elegant script. He took my luggage and led me to a sleek black SUV with tinted windows. Welcome to the Maldives, Ms. Bennett, he said as we pulled away from the small airport. The boat to Orchid Cove is standing by. Mr. Rahim, the general manager, will meet you on arrival. I nodded, gazing out at the scenery as we drove to the marina. The humidity wrapped around me like a warm blanket, so different from the Chicago summer I had left behind. The boat ride to the resort took 20 minutes, the craft slicing through crystal waters as flying fish scattered in our wake. As we approached the private dock, I could see a small welcoming committee assembled. The general manager in a crisp linen suit, flanked by several staff members. I had been explicit in my instructions, no announcement of my arrival, no changes, to the Harrington schedule, and absolute discretion among the staff. As far as the family knew, they were still guests of MHG Luxury Group, enjoying an exclusive retreat at one of the world's most prestigious resorts. Ms. Bennett, Mr. Rahim greeted me as I stepped onto the dock. It is an honor to welcome you to Orchid Cove. Everything has been arranged according to your specifications. Thank you, I said, shaking his hand. Have there been any issues with our special guests? A slight smile touched his lips. None at all. They are, as you predicted, quite demanding, but satisfied with the accommodations and service. Mr. Harrington, Sr. was particularly pleased with the vintage champagne awaiting their arrival. And their current location? The family is having lunch at Azure Restaurant. They have reserved the private dining pavilion over the water. Their meeting is scheduled to begin at 3 p.m. in the conference suite. I checked my watch, just past noon. Perfect. Please have my luggage taken to my suite. I'd like to freshen up before making my presence known. Of course. Ms. Weber arrived yesterday and has been overseeing the transition. She's waiting for you in your residence. A golf cart transported me along winding paths through lush tropical gardens to the presidential suite, a sprawling complex of pavilions set on a secluded stretch of beach, offering complete privacy while commanding a view of the entire resort. Anna Lewis was on the terrace, working on her laptop with a glass of iced tea at her elbow. She looked up as I approached, breaking into a wide smile. The conquering hero arrives, she said, standing to embrace me. How was your flight? Long, I admitted, but productive. I've refined the marketing strategy and have some ideas for the programming. Always working, she said with approval. Come on, let's get you settled. You have about 2 hours before you need to make your grand entrance. The suite was stunning, a masterpiece of tropical luxury with soaring ceilings, sliding glass walls that opened to the sea breeze, and a private, infinity pool that seemed to merge with the ocean beyond. Under different circumstances, I might have taken time to appreciate the beauty of my surroundings, but my mind was focused on the confrontation to come. After showering and changing into a simple but elegant white linen dress, I reviewed the latest status report Anna Lewis had prepared. The resort's financials are actually better than we initially thought, she explained. The problem was never the property itself, but the corporate management structure. Too many decision makers, not enough vision. That changes now, I said, scanning the occupancy figures. What about the staff retention issues? Already addressing them. The previous owners had been cutting corners on employee housing and benefits. I've authorized immediate improvements, which has boosted morale considerably. I nodded, pleased by her initiative. And the Harringtons? Any unusual requests? Anna Lewis smiled. Several. Annette had the staff rearrange the furniture in their residence twice. Clyde demanded a specific scotch that had to be flown in from mail. The brothers' wives requested different pillows within an hour of arrival. And how have the staff responded? With exceptional professionalism. Your instructions to provide impeccable service while documenting every special request have been followed to the letter. I stood, moving to the window to gaze across the resort toward the conference center where the family would soon be gathering. It's time to prepare for the meeting. In my previous life as a Harrington spouse, I had been meticulous about appearance, selecting outfits that were elegant but not attention-grabbing, makeup that enhanced without making a statement. Today, I chose differently. My dress was still tasteful, but the confident simplicity made its own declaration. My hair, usually styled in the soft waves Annette deemed appropriate for a Harrington wife, was pulled back in a sleek, no-nonsense chignon. Anna Lewis watched me with approval. You look like a woman about to take ownership of more than just a resort. At precisely 2:55 p.m., I made my way to the conference center, Anna Lewis beside me. Through the glass doors, I could see the Harrington family already assembled around the large table, documents spread before them, glasses of water and coffee at their elbows. Kevin sat at his father's right hand, his expression serious as he reviewed a spreadsheet. None of them looked up as the doors opened. They were accustomed to staff entering and exiting quietly, attending to their needs without interruption. Mr. Rahim, Clyde was saying, we'll need additional copies of the portfolio analysis before... He stopped mid-sentence as he finally glanced up and saw me standing at the head of the table. The shock on his face would have been comical under different circumstances. Caroline? Kevin stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. What are you doing here? Every head turned, expressions ranging from confusion to disbelief. Annette's perfectly maintained composure slipped for a moment, her mouth dropping open before she caught herself. Hello, everyone, I said, my voice calm and measured. I believe you're waiting for the management presentation about Orchid Cove Resort. I gestured to Anna Lewis, who opened her tablet and projected a document onto the large screen at the end of the room. The new ownership structure of the resort appeared in crisp, unmistakable detail, with Horizon Futures LLC prominently displayed as the majority shareholder. As of 3 days ago, I continued, moving to stand directly across from Clyde, Orchid Cove Resort has been under new ownership and management. I'm here today not as a guest, but as the principal owner. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. Then Clyde let out a bark of laughter. Very funny, Caroline. Now what are you really doing here? Kevin said you were overseeing the Lake Forest renovation. I smiled, not the accommodating smile they were used to seeing, but one that conveyed absolute certainty. Plans change, Clyde. Sometimes people aren't where you expect them to be. Kevin recovered first, moving around the table toward me. Caroline, I don't understand. How are you even here? What is this about ownership? I maintained my position, refusing to step back as he approached. It's exactly what it sounds like, Kevin. I've acquired majority ownership of Orchid Cove Resort through my company, Horizon Futures. Annette let out a disbelieving laugh. That's ridiculous. You don't have that kind of money, dear. Actually, Anna Lewis interjected smoothly. Ms. Bennett secured financing through a combination of private capital and strategic partnerships. The acquisition was completed legally and efficiently. She handed glossy folders to each family member. Here's the complete overview of the new ownership structure and management vision. Clyde snatched his folder, flipping through it with growing agitation. This is some kind of joke, or a misunderstanding. I assure you, it's neither, I replied, my voice steady. If you'll turn to page 3, you'll see the formal transfer of ownership, signed and notarized. Jeff, who had been silent until now, whistled softly. She's not kidding, Dad. These are legitimate documents. Delilah and Celia exchanged glances, a mixture of shock and, was that respect, in their expressions. Dean simply stared, his coffee forgotten in his hand. Kevin's face had gone pale. Caroline, why would you do this? How could you keep something this massive from me? There it was, the question that opened the door to everything I needed to say. I met his gaze directly, letting him see the full truth in my eyes. How does it feel, Kevin, to be excluded from important decisions? To discover that plans were made without your knowledge or input? My voice remained calm, but each word carried the weight of 7 years of accumulated frustration. To find out you're not considered essential to the conversation? Understanding dawned on his face, followed quickly by defensiveness. This is about the vacation? You bought an entire resort because you weren't invited on our family retreat? No, I said firmly. I bought a resort because it was a sound investment opportunity. The timing of your visit is merely convenient. Annette had recovered her composure, her eyes narrowing as she studied me. This is highly inappropriate, Caroline. Whatever point you're trying to make. I'm not trying to make a point, Annette, I interrupted, something I had never done before. I'm establishing a business, one that will be managed according to my vision, not the Harrington template. Clyde slammed his hand on the table. This is outrageous. We've welcomed you into our family, given you every advantage, and this is how you repay us? With some childish power play? I had anticipated this reaction. The immediate recasting of my independence as betrayal, my business acumen as manipulation. It was the same framework they had always used to maintain control, to define the boundaries of acceptable behavior. Welcomed me? I repeated, allowing a hint of irony to color my tone. Is that what you call it? Because from where I stand, I've spent 7 years trying to earn a place at a table where there was never actually a seat for me. That's not fair, Kevin protested. Your family has always treated me as an accessory, Kevin. Useful when convenient, dispensable when not. I turned to address the entire group. But that's not why we're here today. We're here to discuss Orchid Cove Resort, which you are currently enjoying as guests. The strategic redirection worked. Clyde's business instincts couldn't resist engaging. With the tangible issue at hand. Guests? He repeated, his voice dangerously low. We've paid a fortune for this exclusive retreat, and we're honored to have you, I replied smoothly. Your reservation has been noted as a priority for our management team. In fact, we've upgraded your accommodations at no additional charge, as you've already discovered. The professional tone threw them off balance. They had expected emotional confrontation, not corporate courtesy. So what happens now? Jeff asked, the most practical of the brothers. Are you kicking us out? Of course not, I said, allowing myself a small smile. As I mentioned, you're valued guests. We simply wanted to introduce ourselves as the new management and address any concerns you might have about your stay. The mixture of confusion and disbelief on their faces was its own form of satisfaction. For years, they had defined me by their expectations, the compliant daughter-in-law, the useful marketing resource, the silent supporter. Now I was writing my own definition and they didn't know how to read it. Caroline, Kevin said, his voice lowered as he moved closer to me. Can we speak privately, please? I considered him for a moment. The man I had married, the man I had compromised myself for countless times, looked genuinely bewildered by my transformation. Part of me, a smaller part than I would have expected, felt a pang of sympathy. We can speak later, I said. Right now, I have a resort to run. I turned to address the group once more. Please continue with your meeting. The staff will be available for anything you need. Anna Lewis and I have other matters to attend to, but we'll join you for dinner this evening if you'd like. Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked toward the door, Anna Lewis falling into step beside me. I could feel their stares, burning into my back, could almost hear the thoughts racing through their minds as they tried to reconcile the Caroline they thought they knew with the woman now walking away from them. As the door closed behind us, Anna Lewis squeezed my arm. That, she said quietly, was magnificent. We made our way across the resort grounds, the tropical beauty surrounding us a stark contrast to the tension we had left behind. Staff members nodded respectfully as we passed, already adapting to the new ownership structure with professional ease. In my suite, I finally allowed myself to feel the full impact of what I had just done. My hands trembled slightly as I poured myself a glass of water, the adrenaline of the confrontation beginning to ebb. Are you okay? Anna Lewis asked, watching me carefully. I took a deep breath, considering the question honestly. Yes, I said, surprised by the certainty I felt. Better than I've been in years. They'll regroup, she warned. Clyde won't take this lying down. I know. I moved to the terrace, gazing out at the ocean stretching to the horizon. But for the first time, I'm not concerned about the Harrington response. I'm focused on my next steps. As if on cue, my phone began to vibrate with incoming calls and messages. Kevin's name flashed repeatedly on the screen, along with texts from Celia and, surprisingly, Delilah. I set the phone aside, making the conscious choice not to respond immediately. This moment wasn't about them. It was about me stepping fully into the space I had created for myself. Not in reaction to their exclusion, but as an affirmation of my own worth and capabilities. The Caroline who had driven Kevin to the private airfield just days ago would have been checking her phone anxiously, desperate to smooth things over, to explain herself, to seek approval even in her rebellion, that Caroline was gone. In her place stood a woman who had leveraged her skills, resources, and connections to create something entirely her own. A woman who had finally recognized that trying to earn a place in the Harrington family had come at the cost of her own identity. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt a profound sense of liberation. I had broken free not just from the Harringtons' expectations, but from my own learned patterns of accommodation and compromise. Whatever came next, whether reconciliation or permanent separation from Kevin, whether business success or challenges, with the resort, I would face it on my own terms. For the first time in 7 years, I was exactly where I wanted to be. The fallout was immediate. Within an hour of our confrontation in the conference room, the Harrington family had scattered to process the news in their own ways. From my private office in the resort's management suite, I monitored their movements through discreet updates from staff. Clyde had commandeered the business center, making rapid-fire calls to lawyers and financial advisors back in Chicago. Annette had retreated to their residence, dispatching a steady stream of staff with increasingly elaborate requests, a transparent attempt to assert control in the only way available to her. Celia and Dean had taken a boat to the resort's private sandbank, presumably to discuss the situation away from family politics. Jeff was at the bar, while his wife Delilah was reportedly enjoying a spa treatment, as if nothing unusual had occurred, and Kevin was searching for me. He's asked 3 different staff members where you are, reported Marley, the assistant manager I had retained during the ownership transition. Should I direct him here? I considered this, then shook my head. Not yet. Let him process things a bit longer. As I reviewed operational reports with the management team, my phone continued to accumulate messages. Most were from Kevin, their tone evolving from confusion to frustration to something approaching respect. Caroline, we need to talk about this. Now, I don't understand why you would go behind my back on something this massive. Dad is furious. He's talking about legal action. How long have you been planning this? I had no idea you were capable of orchestrating something like this. I'm not sure whether to be angry or impressed. The last message gave me pause. It perfectly encapsulated our relationship, his perpetual underestimation of me, wrapped in what he probably thought was a compliment. Around 5 p.m., an unexpected text appeared from Delilah. That was the most badass thing I've ever seen. Can we talk? Just us? Of all the Harrington spouses, Delilah had always seemed the most out of place. A former art gallery director who had never quite mastered Annette's brand of polished restraint. We'd been friendly but not close, both of us too busy navigating Harrington expectations to form a genuine connection. I sent her my location, curious about her perspective. 20 minutes later, she appeared at my office door, looking both nervous and excited. "So this is where the magic happens," she said, glancing around the elegant space. "Resort owner looks good on you, Caroline." "Thank you," I replied, genuinely, appreciative of her straightforward approach. "How's Jeff handling all this?" Delilah laughed, dropping into a chair opposite my desk. "Completely lost. The whole family is. You've disrupted the natural order of the Harrington universe." She leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Annette nearly had a stroke when she realized you weren't just on vacation but had actually bought the place. I've never seen her speechless before." Despite myself, I smiled. Not the reaction she expected from the Lake Forest project manager. "That's the thing," Delilah said, her expression turning more serious. "None of them expected this because none of them, not even Kevin, ever really saw you. They saw the role they assigned you." Her perception was surprisingly acute. "And you?" I asked. "Did you see me?" She considered this thoughtfully. "Glimpses. When you'd occasionally push back in foundation meetings. When you redesigned that failing hotel brand last year." She shrugged. "But I was too busy trying to survive Annette's constant disapproval to pay proper attention. That was my mistake." There was something refreshing about her honesty, so different from the careful positioning that typically characterized Harrington interactions. "Why are you here, Delilah?" I asked directly. "To witness history," she replied with a small smile. "And maybe to ask, how did you do it? How did you break free? Because I've been trying to figure that out for 4 years." Before I could answer, my phone rang, Clyde's number flashing on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, unsurprised by his attempt to regain control of the situation. "He's been calling everyone," Delilah confirmed. "Lawyers, business associates, even political connections. He's convinced you must have used inside information improperly or violated some obscure clause of the prenup." I remained unruffled. "My legal team reviewed everything thoroughly. The acquisition is completely legitimate and separate from any Harrington interests." Delilah's eyes widened. "You really did think of everything. But what happens now? With you and Kevin, I mean?" It was the question I had deliberately avoided answering for myself. What did I want from my marriage after this seismic shift? "That depends on Kevin," I said finally. "On whether he can see me as a partner rather than an accessory." Delilah nodded, thoughtfully. "For what it's worth, he looks more alive than I've seen him in years. Confused and angry, yes, but also awake." She stood to leave. "Whatever happens, you've changed the game. None of us will look at you the same way again." After she left, I stood at the window watching the sunset paint the ocean gold. The Harringtons had always believed they were the ones with power, to include or exclude, to value or dismiss. But power, I was discovering, was something you claimed for yourself, and I had only just begun. Dinner that evening was set for 8 p.m. in a private beach pavilion, neutral territory. For the inevitable confrontation, I arrived precisely on time, wearing a simple but elegant black dress that I had purchased in mail during a brief excursion while the Harringtons were settling in. It wasn't a designer label that Annette would recognize, but its quiet sophistication made its own statement. The family was already assembled, their usual seating arrangement disrupted by my presence. Clyde had naturally taken one end of the table, but the other, typically reserved for Annette, remained conspicuously empty, awaiting my arrival. Conversations hushed as I approached. I noted with interest that they had all changed for dinner, as if the familiar ritual of formal family meals might somehow restore normalcy to a situation that had spun beyond their control. "Good evening," I said, taking my place at the head of the table opposite Clyde. "I trust you've had time to settle in and explore the resort." The absurdity of this conventional greeting after the afternoon's revelations hung in the air. Kevin, seated to my right, studied my face with an intensity I hadn't seen from him in years. "Let's dispense with the pleasantries," Clyde said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "What exactly do you hope to accomplish with this stunt, Caroline?" I met his gaze steadily. "This isn't a stunt, Clyde. It's a business acquisition, one that makes both strategic and financial sense." "Using what money?" Annette interjected, her tone sharp. "You've never had access to those kinds of resources." "I've had my own assets," I replied calmly, "and excellent investment opportunities." I nodded to the resort staff, who began serving the first course, a delicate seafood appetizer featuring local lobster. "I recommend the paired wine. It's an exceptional vintage." The deliberate change of subject infuriated Clyde, whose face flushed deep red. "We're not here to discuss wine pairings. You've deliberately undermined this family retreat, and I want to know why." I took a small bite of my lobster, savoring it before responding. This pause, this refusal to rush to explanations, was itself a departure from my previous pattern of anxious accommodation. "I find it interesting," I said finally, "that my successful business venture is immediately framed as an attack on the family. Would you characterize Jeff's recent acquisition of that tech startup the same way?" Jeff shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "That was different," he muttered. "How?" I asked directly. "Because it was your decision? Because it aligned with Harrington priorities? Or because it was done by a blood Harrington rather than a spouse?" Kevin placed his hand on mine, a gesture that would have once seemed affectionate but now felt like an attempt to contain me. "Caroline, you're being unfair. No one is questioning your right to pursue business interests. It's the secrecy that's the issue." I gently withdrew my hand from his. "Secrecy," I repeated. "Like the secrecy surrounding the decision to exclude me from this trip? Or the secrecy of family meetings I was never invited to join?" A tense silence fell over the table, broken only by the soft sound of waves lapping at the shore beyond our pavilion. "So this is revenge," Clyde concluded, his voice hardening. "How disappointingly petty." "No, Clyde," I said, looking him directly in the eye. "This is independence. There's a difference." Dean, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. "I don't understand what your end game is here, Caroline. You've made your point. Now what?" It was a fair question, one that cut through the emotional tension to the practical reality. I appreciated his directness. "My end game, as you put it, is to run a successful resort, to apply my marketing expertise and business acumen to an enterprise. That's entirely my own." I gestured to our surroundings. "Orchid Cove has tremendous potential that the previous management failed to realize. I intend to change that." "And what about your marriage?" Annette asked bluntly. "What about your commitment to this family?" Kevin tensed beside me, clearly uncomfortable with his mother's direct question. I took a sip of water, considering my response carefully. "My marriage is between Kevin and me," I said evenly. "As for my commitment to the family, I've demonstrated that consistently for 7 years. The question now is whether this family is capable of respecting me as more than just Kevin's accommodating wife." "You've hardly acted like someone committed to this family," Annette countered. going behind our backs, making major decisions without consultation. Just as you did when you decided I wasn't welcome on this trip, I interrupted, keeping my voice level. Or when you consistently made plans that affected my life without including me in the conversation? Kevin shifted in his seat. Caroline, that's not fair. The succession planning discussions are sensitive. I'm your wife, Kevin, I said, turning to face him fully. Either I'm your partner in all things, or I'm not. There's no middle ground where I'm family when it's convenient and an outsider when it's not. The raw honesty of this statement seemed to catch him off guard. For perhaps the first time, he was seeing the situation from my perspective, recognizing the inconsistency that had defined my place in the family. Clyde, ever the strategist, attempted to regain control of the conversation. Whatever grievances you think you have, this is hardly the appropriate response. You've put us in an impossible position. Actually, I said, I've put you in a luxury resort where you're receiving exceptional service. The only impossible position is the one you've created by assuming my actions are about you rather than about my own aspirations. As the main course arrived, perfectly grilled local fish with tropical vegetables, I watched the family exchange glances, their usual, unified front fracturing under the pressure of a situation they couldn't control. Kevin leaned closer, speaking quietly. We need to talk, privately. I nodded once. After dinner. The confrontation had only just begun, but already the dynamic had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't seeking their approval or acceptance. I was defining the terms of engagement. And in doing so, I had changed everything. After dinner, Kevin and I walked along the shoreline, the moonlight creating a silver path across the darkened water. Neither of us spoke immediately. The sound of gentle waves and distant music from the resort's main bar filled the silence between us. I keep trying to understand how we got here, Kevin finally said, his voice quieter than usual. How my wife secretly bought a resort without me having any idea what was happening. I stopped walking, turning to face the ocean rather than him. That's precisely the problem, Kevin. You had no idea what was happening with me because you weren't looking. You haven't really looked at me in years. He made a sound of frustration. That's not fair. We see each other every day. Seeing isn't the same as looking, I replied. When was the last time you asked what I wanted? Not what would be convenient for your family or your business, but what would fulfill me. Kevin ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from countless moments of discomfort throughout our marriage. I thought you were happy with our life. You never said otherwise. I tried, I said simply. Many times, in many ways. But your default was always to align with your family's expectations rather than to stand with me. He was silent for a long moment, absorbing this. When he spoke again, his tone had changed, become more reflective. The resort purchase, it's not just about making a point, is it? It's about having something that's truly yours. It was the first indication that he might actually understand. I nodded. I spent years trying to earn my place in your family by being useful, accommodating, supportive. But it was never enough, because I was always seen as an addition rather than an integral part. So yes, I created something that's mine. Something where my value isn't determined by how well I serve someone else's vision. Kevin took a step toward me, then hesitated. What does this mean for us, Caroline? For our marriage? It was the question I had been considering since the moment I decided to pursue the acquisition. Not what the Harringtons would think, not how they would react, but what I wanted for my own future. That depends, I said, finally turning to face him directly. Are you asking as Kevin Harrington, dutiful son and heir to the family business? Or as my husband, a man who can see me clearly and value me for myself? His expression reflected genuine conflict. I don't know how to separate those parts of myself. The Harrington legacy has always been central to who I am. I'm not asking you to abandon your legacy, I clarified. I'm asking if there's room in it for a wife who has ambitions and capabilities of her own. A wife who won't always prioritize Harrington interests above her own fulfillment. Kevin looked out at the darkened horizon, seemingly wrestling with concepts he had never been forced to consider. My parents' marriage has always followed a certain model. Dad's vision first, Mom's support making it possible. It's what I grew up with. And is it what you want? I pressed. A wife who exists, primarily to advance your agenda? Because if so, Kevin, that's not me. Not anymore. He turned back to me, his expression troubled. I don't know what I want anymore. Everything seemed so clear before we came here. Now. He gestured vaguely at the resort around us. Now I'm questioning assumptions I didn't even realize I had. Was an honest answer. More honest than I had expected. There was a vulnerability in his confusion that the confident, decisive Kevin Harrington rarely displayed. I've made a decision, I said quietly. I'm staying here at Orchid Cove for the foreseeable future. There's much to be done to realize the potential of this property, and I intend to be directly involved. His eyes widened. You're not coming back to Chicago? Not immediately, no. I've arranged for my things to be packed and shipped here. The penthouse is yours, of course. Caroline, you can't just— I can, I interrupted gently. And I have. This isn't an impulsive decision, Kevin. It's one I've thought through carefully. He stared at me, finally beginning to grasp the magnitude of the change. So you're leaving me? Is that what this is? I shook my head. I'm not filing for divorce, if that's what you're asking. But I am creating space to discover who I am outside of the role I've played in your life. What happens next is partly up to you. What does that mean? He asked, frustration edging back into his voice. It means you have a choice to make. You can continue to view me through the lens of Harrington expectations, or you can see me as I actually am, a woman with talents, ambitions, and needs of my own. I looked directly into his eyes. If you want a marriage based on partnership, rather than accommodation, you're going to have to recognize that I've changed. The question is whether you can change too. Kevin fell silent again, absorbing the implications. Around us, the tropical night hummed with life. Insects chirping, distant laughter from resort guests, the rhythmic sound of waves meeting shore. It struck me that this paradise would now be my home, at least for a time. The thought filled me with unexpected peace. I should go, I said finally. I have an early meeting with the management team tomorrow. As I turned to leave, Kevin caught my hand. Wait. His voice had lost its defensive edge. I don't want to lose you, Caroline. It was what I might have longed to hear just weeks ago. Now I recognized it as only a beginning, necessary but insufficient. Then, start seeing me, Kevin. Really seeing me. I gently withdrew my hand from his. Good night. As I walked back toward my suite, I felt the weight of 7 years of compromise beginning to lift. The path forward wasn't clear, but for the first time, it was truly mine to determine. The Harringtons didn't depart the following morning, as I half expected. Instead, they regrouped, adapting to the new reality with the strategic flexibility that had built their business empire. By midday, Clyde had requested a formal tour of the resort's operations, a transparent attempt to assess the legitimacy of my management capacity. I assigned the head of operations to guide him through the facilities, choosing to focus my attention on meetings with department heads. If Clyde expected me to drop everything in response to his interest, he would be disappointed. This was perhaps the clearest signal that the dynamic had fundamentally changed. Kevin approached me differently, with a tentative thoughtfulness I'd rarely seen from him. He appeared at my office doorway around noon, holding 2 fresh coconuts with straws. Peace offering, he said, extending one toward me. Can I come in? I gestured to the chair across from my desk, accepting the coconut with a small nod of thanks. I have about 15 minutes before my next meeting. He glanced around the office, at the resort plans spread across my desk, the laptop open to financial projections, the notepad filled with my handwriting. For perhaps the first time, he was seeing me in a professional context that he hadn't created or controlled. "You seem at home here," he observed, an odd note in his voice. "I am," I replied simply. He took a sip from his coconut, gathering his thoughts. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, about not seeing you clearly." His eyes met mine, with unusual directness. "I think you might be right." It was an admission I hadn't expected. Kevin rarely acknowledged his shortcomings, particularly when it came to our relationship. "This morning," he continued, "I was talking with Delilah, of all people. She pointed out that in the 7 years we've been married, I've never asked about your career ambitions. Not really. I assumed your happiness would naturally align with supporting mine." I set down my coconut, surprised by this insight. "That's true. You haven't. What would you have said if I had asked?" His question seemed genuinely curious rather than defensive. I considered this carefully. "I would have told you that I didn't abandon my marketing career because I lost interest in it. I set it aside because I believed I was building something equally meaningful with you, a partnership." Kevin winced slightly. "And instead, you got a role," I finished for him. "A carefully defined position in the Harrington hierarchy with very specific expectations and limited room for growth." He didn't immediately deny this characterization, which itself represented a shift. "Dad wants to have dinner with us tonight. Just the 3 of us." I raised an eyebrow. "To discuss what exactly?" "A proposition." Kevin leaned forward slightly. "He's impressed, Caroline. Not that he'd admit it directly, but I can tell. The way you pulled this off, the financing, the discretion, the execution, it's the kind of strategic thinking he respects." "I'm not interested in Clyde's approval," I said firmly. "That's not what this is about." "I know that now," Kevin replied, surprising me again. "But hear him out, please, for me." I studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. Was this simply another attempt to bring me back into the fold on Harrington terms? Or was there something more genuine in his request? "I'll consider it," I said finally. "Have his assistant coordinate with mine for the details." Kevin nodded, standing to leave. At the door, he paused. "You're extraordinary, you know that? I just never gave you the space to show it." Before I could respond, he was gone. The dinner with Clyde was set for 7 p.m. at Orchid Cove's most exclusive restaurant, a intimate space perched on stilts over the lagoon, with only 5 tables and a renowned chef. I arrived precisely on time to find Kevin and his father already seated, drinks in hand. "Caroline," Clyde greeted me, rising from his chair with unexpected courtesy. "Thank you for joining us." The formality was new, a tacit acknowledgement that I was no longer simply his son's wife, but someone to be addressed with professional respect. I accepted the subtle shift with a gracious nod. "Your resort is impressive," he continued as I took my seat. "The operational structure is more sophisticated than I expected." Coming from Clyde, this qualified as effusive praise. "Thank you. We've made several improvements since the acquisition. So I've observed." He sipped his scotch thoughtfully. "Which brings me to the purpose of this dinner. I have a proposition for you." I glanced at Kevin, who was watching his father with careful attention. "I'm listening." "The Harrington Group would like to discuss a potential partnership with Horizon Futures, a joint venture focusing on luxury hospitality properties in emerging markets. The offer was unexpected, not an attempt to reclaim control or diminish my achievement, but a business proposal that acknowledged my new position. It represented a significant concession from a man who rarely compromised. "Why?" I asked directly. "You have an established hospitality division with extensive resources. What would my company bring to this partnership that you don't already have?" Clyde's expression remained impassive, but I detected a flicker of approval at my direct approach. Fresh perspective, innovative marketing strategies, and frankly, a demonstrated ability to identify undervalued properties with significant growth potential. He gestured subtly around us. Case in point. Kevin watched me carefully, clearly hoping I would see this as an olive branch. But I recognized it as something more complex, a strategic realignment in response to changed circumstances. This partnership, I said carefully, would it be structured as equals? Or would Horizon Futures be expected to operate as a subsidiary of the Harrington Group? Clyde's mouth tightened slightly. I envisioned a 60-40 arrangement, with the Harrington Group maintaining majority control. Of course you did, I replied, unable to keep a hint of irony from my voice. Because even when acknowledging my capabilities, you still can't quite accept me as a true equal. Kevin's eyes widened at my directness, but Clyde merely studied me with new consideration. And what would you propose instead? He asked. I'm not proposing anything, Clyde, I said calmly. Horizon Futures is developing its own strategic plan. If that eventually includes partnerships, they'll be with organizations that value what we bring to the table without assumptions of superiority. The remainder of the Harrington family's stay unfolded with a strange new dynamic. I maintained my professional focus on the resort, joining them occasionally for meals but primarily establishing my presence as Orchid Cove's owner and visionary. The staff, who had quickly adapted to the change in leadership, treated me with a respect that had nothing to do with my connection to the Harrington name. 2 days before their scheduled departure, I found Annette sitting alone at the resort's beachfront bar, nursing a gin and tonic as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sand. Her usual armor of perfection seemed slightly weakened, her hair less rigorously styled, her expression unguarded as she gazed out at the ocean. I considered walking past, avoiding what would inevitably be a difficult conversation. Instead, I took the seat beside her, ordering a sparkling water from the bartender. Beautiful sunset, I observed neutrally. Annette glanced at me, taking a measured sip of her drink. I've always preferred sunrise, the beginning rather than the end. It was an unexpectedly poetic sentiment from a woman whose communications typically centered on pragmatic directives. Caroline, she said abruptly, I think it's time we spoke honestly. I turned to face her fully. I agree. When Kevin brought you home, I saw a lovely, accomplished young woman who would make an appropriate addition to our family. Her emphasis on addition rather than member was telling. I assumed you understood the role you were accepting, that certain compromises were part of marrying into a family like ours. And by compromises, you mean subordinating my own ambitions and identity to Harrington priorities, I clarified. She didn't deny it. Every family has its structure, its hierarchy. Ours has been successful for generations because we maintain clear priorities. At what cost, Annette? I asked quietly. Look at Kevin. Look at his brothers. Are any of them truly fulfilled, or are they simply fulfilling the roles assigned to them? Her lips tightened. Fulfillment is a modern luxury. Duty and legacy are what built this family. And that's the fundamental difference between us, I said. I believe fulfillment and duty can coexist, that partnerships are stronger when both parties are valued for their unique contributions. Annette studied me, something like reluctant respect flickering in her eyes. You've certainly proved your capabilities with this venture. She gestured at the resort around us. Though your methods leave much to be desired. My methods were shaped by years of having more appropriate approaches dismissed or ignored, I replied evenly. When conventional paths are blocked, resourceful people find alternatives. She finished her drink, signaling for another before turning back to me. What do you want, Caroline? Really? It was perhaps the first genuine question she had ever asked me. Not a test or a trap, but an actual inquiry into my desires. I want To be valued for who I am, not just for how well I serve Harrington interests, I said simply. I want my marriage to be a true partnership. I want space to pursue my own vision alongside Kevin's. And if those ambitions conflict with family priorities? Then we negotiate as equals. That's what real partnerships do. Annette received her fresh drink, taking a thoughtful sip. You know, in another life, we might have been allies rather than adversaries. We still could be, I suggested. But it would require you to see me differently, not as a threat to your control or an extension of your son, but as a person in my own right. She gave a small, humorless laugh. At my age, change doesn't come easily. Perhaps, I acknowledged. But is preserving the old pattern worth potentially losing Kevin? Because that's what's at stake here. For the first time, genuine emotion crossed her perfectly maintained facade. He wouldn't choose between us. I'm not asking him to, I clarified. I'm asking him to choose a different kind of marriage than the model you've provided. And I'm suggesting that you might support that choice rather than resist it. Annette turned back to the horizon, where the sun was now a glowing half-circle sinking into the sea. I'll consider what you've said. It wasn't agreement, but it was more than I had ever received from her before. As I stood to leave, she spoke. Again, her voice quieter. The resort suits you. It has potential. From Annette, this qualified as extravagant praise. I accepted it with a nod before walking away, knowing that whatever happened next, the fundamental dynamic had irrevocably changed. That evening, I worked late in my office, reviewing marketing, proposals for Orchid Cove's repositioning. When I finally returned to my suite, I found a thick manila envelope on my desk with my name written in Kevin's distinctive handwriting. Inside was a legal document, not divorce papers as I momentarily feared, but something equally significant. Kevin had transferred his ownership shares in a small but promising boutique hotel chain from the Harrington Group to me personally. Attached was a handwritten note. Caroline, this was always more your vision than mine. Perhaps it's time for you to make it truly yours. We have decisions to make about our future, but whatever happens, this belongs to you. Kevin. 1 year later, I stood on the private deck of my overwater villa at Orchid Cove, watching the sunrise paint the sky in delicate shades of pink and gold. The resort had transformed under my leadership, just as I had transformed in claiming my independence. After the Harringtons' departure that pivotal week, I had remained in the Maldives, immersing myself in the day-to-day operations of the resort while implementing my vision for its future. The authentic luxury concept I had sketched years before had become Orchid Cove's guiding philosophy, emphasizing meaningful experiences over ostentatious displays of wealth, sustainability over excess, connection over exclusivity. The changes had paid off both critically and financially. Bookings had increased by 68% over the previous year. Travel publications that had once dismissed Orchid Cove as merely another playground for the ultra-wealthy now praised its innovative programming and genuine commitment to environmental stewardship. The staff, who had initially viewed me with cautious curiosity, had become passionate advocates for the resort's new direction. Most importantly, I had rediscovered parts of myself that had been submerged during my years as Caroline Harrington. My creative instincts, my decision-making confidence, my ability to inspire others, all had flourished in this environment where I was valued for my vision rather than my compliance. Ms. Bennett, your 9 a.m. conference call is ready. I turned to see my assistant standing respectfully at the villa's entrance. I had reverted to my maiden name professionally, though my personal life remained more complicated. Thank you, Aisha. I'll be right there. As I gathered my materials for the call, a discussion with potential investors for the expansion of Horizon Future's hospitality portfolio, I caught sight of the framed article on my wall. Forbes had featured me in their Women to Watch issue, highlighting the remarkable turnaround of Orchid Cove and my emerging influence in the luxury hospitality sector. The photo showed me standing on this very deck, the endless ocean behind, me, my expression confident and serene. It was an image that would have been unimaginable 2 years ago, when my identity had been so thoroughly enmeshed with the Harrington family narrative. Kevin and I had spent the past year navigating a new kind of relationship, neither fully together nor definitively apart. He had returned to Chicago after that transformative week, but our separation had evolved into something more nuanced than a simple estrangement. He had visited Orchid Cove quarterly, ostensibly to discuss the boutique hotel chain he had transferred to me, which was now thriving under my direction. But those business discussions inevitably gave way to deeper conversations about what we both wanted from life, from our careers, from each other. Surprisingly, it was Kevin who had changed the most. Free from his parents' daily influence, he had begun questioning aspects of the Harrington approach that he had previously accepted without thought. He had started a foundation focused on affordable housing, a deviation from the family's typical high-profile philanthropic endeavors. He had even stood up to Clyde during a board meeting, defending a strategy that his father opposed. I learned it from my wife, he had reportedly said when questioned about his newfound assertiveness. She taught me that respect isn't the same as agreement. We hadn't resolved the fundamental question of our marriage, but we had established something we'd never truly had before: mutual respect as individuals with separate identities and complementary strengths. Annette had maintained a cool distance, though she had sent an unexpectedly gracious note when Horizon Futures acquired its second property, a struggling ski resort in Switzerland that was now being reimagined along the lines of Orchid Cove's successful model. "Your vision has merit," she had written. "The execution remains impressive." From Annette, this qualified as effusive approval. My conference call that morning was with a diverse group of investors interested in backing Horizon Futures' expansion into urban markets. As I presented my vision for bringing our authentic luxury concept to city environments, I felt a familiar thrill of creative energy, the same feeling that had once made me excel in marketing before I'd set that path aside for the Harringtons. "The demographic analysis confirms what we suspected," I explained, sharing my screen to display the relevant data. "There's significant demand for hospitality experiences that feel personal and transformative rather than generic and transactional, even in major business hubs." The lead investor, a sharp-minded woman who had built her own technology empire, nodded approvingly. "Your track record at Orchid Cove speaks for itself. When can you have the full proposal ready?" 2 weeks, I promised confidently. After concluding the call, I stepped back onto my deck, taking a moment to absorb the beauty surrounding me. A year ago, I had bought this resort as an act of self-assertion, determined to show the Harringtons, and myself, that I was more than the role they had assigned me. What had begun as a reaction had evolved into a genuine calling, a path that utilized my talents and fulfilled me in ways I had almost forgotten were possible. My phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. "Landing in mail at 4 p.m. Still okay for dinner?" Smiled, typing my response. "Yes, I have news to share." What I didn't add was that the news involved a decision about our future. Not a return to our old dynamic, which was impossible now, but perhaps the beginning of something new. A relationship between equals, each with their own distinct identity and purpose, choosing to build something together rather than one simply supporting the other's vision. Whether Kevin was ready for that fundamental shift remained to be seen. But regardless of his response, I knew my own path forward. Horizon Futures was expanding, my professional reputation growing, my sense of self stronger than it had ever been. I had discovered that sometimes the greatest act of self-respect is walking away from those who cannot see your true value. And sometimes the most profound transformation comes not from seeking others' approval, but from finally, unequivocally, approving of yourself. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.